Professor Brahma. Yes, so very soon we are going to start these 6 sessions. I'm very sorry for this quick tea breaks. So we are running out of times. So we will be starting the 6 sessions. The 6 sessions, the topic would be about the Tibet, the third pole of the world, impact of China's repressive policies on Tibetan culture, identity, and environments. And the session will be chaired by Professor Srikanth Kondapalli. So I give the floor to the professor. Professor Kondapalli, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gyalpo Arya, Sevang Gyalpo Arya. Good afternoon to all of you. This session is about the environmental issues, the ecological issues that are affecting the roof of the world. A few issues come up quickly with the Chinese rule, party state rule for over 7 decades in Tibet. We see that a number of infrastructure projects have been developed. We also see a lot of Hanization, displacement of the people, Tibetan people, in which they have become actually minorities in their own land. As a result of this, we have 4 main consequences. His Holiness the Dalai Lama was quoted in the WikiLeaks that the glacier meltdown is the major problem affecting Tibet at the moment. And it is estimated that there were around 40,000 or more glaciers, and there is a lot of receding of these glaciers in the recent times with the infrastructure projects that have been built up, including the Tibet Railway and others. The second major issue that has come about is in terms of the resources depletion. There are an estimated 100 minerals or so which have been pumped out into the modernization of China. And this has created a lot of environmental havoc in the Tibet region. The third main is that Tibet is endowed with 6 major rivers which flow into China and South Asia and Southeast Asia. China has been constructing a lot of dams recently, and a few weeks ago they announced about the $137 billion project. This is coming soon after the earthquake in Gyaltsen and other areas. This has resulted in much more concerns regarding the natural disasters in the area. Nevertheless, China is going ahead with these, in addition to the South-North River Diversion Project. 2 of these have already been constructed, and the last one to divert the Yarlung Zampo is commencing, and the project completion date is about 2050. So they are spending about 130 billion yuan on this project. The first 2 have been completed, which means that there is a lot of water stress problem. The fourth issue in terms of the human aspect of the ecological disaster happening in Tibet is about the ghettos. Tibetan nomads have all been now put up in ghettos with huge surveillance in Tibet area. And this has also created a lot of concern in terms of the human element of the environmental issues. So to discuss these, we have 2 distinguished panelists. I have heard from them before. I can assure you we will have a very good session promised for this afternoon. May I now request Mr. Tempa Gyaltsen Zamlha, who is the Deputy Director of the Tibet Policy Institute, and then Professor Brahma Chellaney to speak on the water issues. First on the ecosystem, fragile ecosystem in the Tibetan Plateau. Over to you, Tempa.
Thank you very much, Professor Kondapalli ji. Very good evening to you all. In the next 10 minutes of my presentation, I will try to cover 2 important facts: the global ecological importance of the Tibet Plateau and the environmental situation in Tibet under Chinese occupation. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the picture you see up on the screen is a picture of the Tibet Plateau, standing tall at an average elevation of more than 4,000 meters above sea level, with an area of 2.5 million square kilometers. If Tibet has remained an independent state without Chinese occupation, it would be the 10th largest country in the world, which also makes it the world's highest and largest plateau ever existed in the geological history of the Earth. Because of its high elevation and massive surface area, Tibet Plateau is also home to the largest concentration of glaciers after North Pole and South Pole. It is also only region which is not within the polar regions that has massive concentration of glaciers. Now, because of this concentration of glaciers, Tibet Plateau also becomes the largest source of fresh water after both North and South Poles, which is why it is called the Earth's third pole. And we Tibetans have always called it the land of snow or the snowland paradise. Now, Tibet as the roof of the world, and Earth's third pole, and then Tibet as the rainmaker. Now, because of the three factors, number one, its high elevation. Number two, its massive surface area. And number three, because of large concentration of glaciers, it influences climatic conditions across Asia, particularly Asia. Now, you see in the screen, the Indian monsoon, the East Asian monsoon, and the westerlies, all of them direct towards Tibetan Plateau. So the direction, intensity, and the timing of all these monsoons are influenced by what's happening on the Tibet Plateau and its surface areas. A recent scientific paper has also linked the increasing heat waves in Europe to the loss of glaciers on the Tibet Plateau as well. Furthermore, there are scientific papers relating that greater the snowfall on the Tibetan Plateau, warmer it is in Canada. So we can say the Tibet Plateau influences climatic conditions across the northern hemisphere. You might be surprised that the first ever weather forecast in India, issued back in 1882, was based on the amount of snowfall received the previous winter on the Tibet Plateau or the Himalayas. So much of Asia's weather pattern is dependent or influenced by Tibet Plateau. Now, Tibet as the water tower of Asia, something that Professor Brahma Chellaney would give you more detailed presentation for sure. But my presentation would be incomplete without saying a few words. Now, 6 most important rivers, or the greatest rivers in Asia, all originate from the Tibet Plateau and support 10 most densely populated nations on Earth. You go from Pakistan to India, Bangladesh to Burma, Thailand to Laos, Cambodia to Vietnam, and to China. You are never far from Tibetan rivers, supporting 1.8 billion people directly and almost 40% of world population some way or other. Unfortunately, this beautiful place, this magnificent plateau, is facing unprecedented destruction, primarily due to Chinese occupation, but partly due to climate change. That's where I will try to highlight, focus on three important facts. Like everywhere else on Earth, Tibetan Plateau is also facing destructive impact from climate change. Since 2050, we have seen unprecedented natural disasters, primarily due to increased precipitation. Now, it is all because of the unique topographic feature and the geographical location of the Tibet Plateau, that when the world gets cold, Tibet gets colder. When the world gets warm, Tibet gets warmer. And another threat that Tibet Plateau faces is directly from China, destructive form of mining across the plateau. In fact, the Chinese People's Liberation Army, before marching into Tibet, met Chinese leader Mao Zedong. And you know what he said? Tibet is a massive country with a small population, but enormous amount of natural resources. So that was one of the factors why China occupied Tibet. And since then, they have expanded mining across the plateau. And there are more than 300 medium to large scale mining across the plateau. And in recent years, they have consolidated, expanded, and accelerated mining in Tibet. Now, there have been also more than 30 large-scale protests against mining in Tibet. to give you the seriousness of it, 3 self-immolations in 2012 and 2013 were against mining in Amchok. Another incident that also occurred in 2013 during a protest against one of the mining on Sacred Mountain. As the Chinese started firing on Tibetan protesters, one of the Tibetans stabbed himself. His name was Subok Chudu. You know what he said afterwards? There was no one we could go for justice. That's why we are here, to be the voice for the voiceless, so that we communicate the plight of Tibetans in Tibet to the international community. Now, if you see on the map, the concentration of Tibetan mineral resources are in 3 particular areas: lithium and copper in eastern Tibet, copper in the center of Tibet, oil and gas in northern Tibet. Copper was, China has the largest copper mine in Tibet. And in recent years, they have accelerated the lithium mining. And as recent as on 8 January 2025, Chinese government published that they have discovered 40 million tons of lithium in Tibet, and another 1 million in eastern Tibet, which together makes it the second largest producer of lithium. And China is the largest producer of electric car, electric battery, and solar panels. All require lithium, and much of it comes from Tibet and Mongolia. Unfortunately, China is also expanding highways, railway lines, construction of dams, all to expand and accelerate mining in Tibet. Now, coming to the third form of destruction from Chinese government, construction of dams. China is a nation with the largest number of dams. In Tibet, there are more than 193 large-scale dams scattered mostly in the south and southeastern regions of Tibet. Unfortunately, Tibet is a highly seismic-prone zone. That's something that you can see in the map. And there have been more than 18 earthquakes with magnitude above 8 that have been recorded since the recording began. And two massive earthquakes. One, 2008 Wenchuan earthquake, which killed 80,000 people, and 2014 Ludian earthquake. Both were induced by 2 nearby dams, which is stated by Chinese geologists themselves. So, one recent incident. The Chinese government started to displace Tibetans from, with the construction of Kamtu Dam, they have started to displace people from Wambote, the picture you see up there, taking away their farms, their homes, their monasteries, displacing them from the memory of their land, home, and history. But this is not only just one dam. There are 13 other dams on the same river. But this very dam is not very far from a massive landslide happened back in 2018. You know what was surprising? It took 11 days to release the water blockage. And it took 5 days to reach a large bulldozer to remove the earth. Had there been a protest, political protest, Chinese would have sent dozens of trucks within minutes. It's been the second largest economy and one of the most powerful nation. But when it comes to such a disaster, it took 11 days. Fortunately, it happened in November, when the river volume was at its lowest. And that leads us to the possible repeat of Banjun dam collapse, which happened in 1975. You know what happened? Because of heavy rainfall in China, 61 dams collapsed at the same time, killing almost 240,000 Chinese. You know what the Chinese said afterwards? The dams were designed to survive once in a 1,000-year flood. But once in a 2,000-year rainfall happened. We all know China has improved its technology in building dams and also skills. But with the rapid climatic conditions, changing climatic condition, and melting of glaciers and permafrost, anything can happen on the Tibet Plateau, and that we might be bearing the brunt of Chinese dams. So finally, to conclude, the Chinese government must respect the rights of the Tibetan people to live in harmony with its environment as we have always done, and that Tibet should not be destroyed for the economic progress of China. Number two, the global community, as you are presented here, must recognize the ecological importance of the Tibet Plateau and take action to protect it from further environmental degradation. And finally, riparian countries being nourished by Tibetan rivers, must collaborate in preserving the Tibet Plateau's fragile ecosystem and protect its shared water system. With that, thank you very much. Thanks, sir.
Thank you very much, Kampala, especially for those last three policy-related options and suggestions. I request also Professor Brahma Chellaney, Professor Emeritus with the Center for Policy Research, to also focus on what needs to be done.
Thank you, Chair, and I'm going to be borrowing that same laptop. In fact, I'll be continuing where Tempa Gyaltsen left off. I'll be just adding to his presentation to spotlight how the Tibetan Plateau plays a central role in Asia's water security. Thank you. First, why is Tibet called Asia's water tower? It's the world's largest repository of fresh water. It has more glacier mass, that is more ice mass, other than the Arctic and the Antarctica. But the two poles, because the fresh water there is all locked up in ice. In comparison, in Tibet, besides the frozen water in permafrost or in glaciers, there's a lot of water in Tibet that is usable. So Tibet is the world's largest repository of usable fresh water. And it's no wonder that the world's big river systems, not all, the Congo, the Amazon, are exceptions to the large rivers that flow in Asia, but the big rivers of Asia, including the rivers of mainland China, the rivers of Southeast Asia, the rivers of South Asia, except for the Ganges, which originates on the Indian side of the Himalayas, but the main tributaries of the Ganges originate in Tibet. You can see from this one map why the Tibetan Plateau is called Asia's water tower. And this water tower faces unprecedented ecological devastation today. And these rivers support 2 billion people living downstream, 2 billion people. That's about 30% of the world's population depends on these river systems. So they are critical lifeline of Asia. The other thing that actually follows from what Tempa Gyaltsen pointed out is that the scale of environmental degradation in Tibet is also unparalleled. And I'm just going to focus on one thing so that you can get a glimpse of what's happening on the Tibetan Plateau. As you know, China began invading the Tibetan Plateau in 1950. By 51 end, it had occupied the entire Tibet. But in just about 4 decades later, you can see from the deforestation, the top map shows forested areas marked dark blue and light blue, and 42 years later, much of the forest cover has disappeared from the southern belt. The southern belt is where the rivers originate. The great rivers of Asia originate in the southern belt of Tibet because rest of Tibet is largely arid. It's the Himalayan region where the rivers originate. And unfortunately, much of the mineral wealth of Tibet, the strategic minerals of Tibet, like lithium, gold, are also largely mined in the southern belt. In fact, there's a little of Tibet in every phone that we have because lithium largely comes from this particular region, Tibet. Now you can see the devastation. And of course, the devastation extends beyond Tibet to Nepal and to parts of India, but you can see the devastation in terms of the lost forest cover. One other thing that explains the environmental degradation is China's dam frenzy. Dam frenzy, these are just dams, new dams that China unveiled in 2010. And this is from the official dam builder, Hydropower Corporation. After I published this map from Hydropower Corporation, they took out that map from their website. They felt very embarrassed by my use of this map. And after that, they have not published any map showing new dams on a map. But if I showed you all the dams that China has, you will not see China on the map because China will be covered with dams. When the communists came to power in 1949, there were only 22 dams of any significant size in China. Today, China is home to more than half of the world's large dams. That is, more than 25,000 large dams are located in China alone, more than half of the world's large dams. Our large dams defined internationally as a structure with a minimum height of 15 meters or a water storage capacity of more than 3 million cubic meters. Now, China has more than 25,000 large dams, as I mentioned. So if you calculate, it means that since the communists came to power, they have built one large dam every day since 1949. And if you include all the dams that China has, those dams number more than 88,000. Large, medium, and small dams, they number more than 88,000. So that's the reason why these dams, these are all large dams that Hydro China Corporation unveiled in a map form in 2010. Since 2010, China has announced hundreds of more dams, but the difference is now that the dams are largely concentrated on international rivers. In other words, Tibet has become the focal point of dam building. That's the difference between 2010 and 2025. In just 15-year period, the dam building has entirely shifted to international rivers. And now this next slide explains the Mekong Basin dilemma. The Mekong Basin illustrates how China is weaponizing water even against friendly countries located downstream. I'm not talking about India, which is China's geopolitical rival. I'm talking of countries like Thailand, Cambodia, Laos. These are all very friendly, China-friendly countries. But look, just before this river enters Southeast Asia, continental Southeast Asia, China has built 11 mega dams. One dam of China, its installed hydropower generating capacity is larger than all of the dams located downstream. That is the size of the mega dams China is building has built on the Mekong. And the worst part, for which I don't have a slide, is how the Mekong Delta is retreating largely because of China's dam building. What is happening is that not only is the delta retreating in South Vietnam, salt water is intruding, forcing farmers to shift traditional rice cultivation to shrimp farming or growing reeds. So you can see how even the livelihoods have been changed. And now let me show you what China is doing to India. Now this is an amplified map showing the world's largest dam ever conceived, being built right on the India border, a few miles from the India border. This is one of the world's most militarized borders. As Ambassador Sinha mentioned in the morning, that traditionally the India-Tibet border was a very peaceful border where nomads and pilgrims and tourists crossed. But now it's one of the world's most militarized borders, and right there, just before the Brahmaputra River enters India, China is building a dam whose installed hydropower capacity would be almost three times larger than the gorgeous dam. But the worst part, which I think Tempa Gyaltsen pointed out, is that this is the world's riskiest project. It's the world's riskiest project because it's coming up in a highly earthquake-prone region. This is a geopolitical fault line where the Indian plate collides with the Eurasian plate. You remember this recent earthquake that devastated Myanmar and also was felt in Bangkok, where a skyscraper being built by a Chinese company collapsed? That earthquake was also triggered by this collision between the Indian plate and the Eurasian plate. But the best example is what happened in 2008 when an earthquake in the eastern rim of the Tibetan Plateau in Sichuan killed 87,000 people by Chinese official estimates. That drew international attention to what scientists call RTS, which is reservoir-triggered seismicity. Reservoir-triggered seismicity is when the weight of water impounded in a large dam reservoir causes geological stresses, tectonic stresses, triggering earthquakes. Not just international scientists, Chinese scientists published papers after that earthquake blaming the newly constructed Zamlha Dam for causing that devastating earthquake. That devastating earthquake occurred just 2 years after the Zamlha Dam was commissioned by China. So this particular project is the world's riskiest project because it's coming up right on the geological fault line, and that makes it a ticking water bomb for downstream communities in India and potentially even in Bangladesh, because Bangladesh is located furthest downstream. So now to conclude as to what can be done, and I think, and I think, in fact, our chair mentioned this south-north water diversion project, and he pointed out, our chair, that the two legs, the eastern leg and the central leg, both are complete, but those two legs involve internal rivers. The third leg is which is under construction, which has transboundary implications because it is to reroute Tibetan waters to the north, to China's parched north. Now, this is again an environmentally damaging program. It's a large-scale program. It's a very ambitious program. And the Chinese Communist Party, since it grabbed power in 1949, has always believed in bending nature to its will. It's not living in harmony with nature. It's to bend nature to the CCP's will. So to end, what can be done? And I think it's important to remember one thing, that Tibet's increasing environmental degradation has implications not just for Asia, but for the world, including loss of global biodiversity. Why? First, because of its towering height. Tibetan Plateau towers over Asia. In fact, it stretches into the troposphere. It's so tall. It greatly influences Asia's climatic, weather, and monsoonal patterns, but it also influences the northern hemisphere's atmospheric general circulation. atmospheric general circulation is a vast system of winds that transports warm air from the equator to higher latitudes, creating different climatic zones in the world. So what's happening on the Tibetan Plateau, make no mistake, holds global implications. Not just for Asia, it holds global implications. Therefore, the global silence on what's happening in Tibet is, is, is astounding because it's going to affect international security, international well-being, and we have to recognize that, that despite the scale of the crisis, the international community has done little. Tibet is off limits to international observers, as we know, but it's the fear of offending China, the fear of offending China, that has stymied calls, international calls for environmental accountability. But the costs of inaction are going to be staggering. Tibet is not a geopolitical pawn. It is Asia's lifeline. It is also an area, as I mentioned, that has implications beyond Tibet. The time to confront the silent, slow-burning catastrophe on the roof of the world is now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Chellaney. The first time water was used as a weapon was in the 1930s in a major conflict. Chiang Kai-shek destructed the dams so that the Japanese troops are flooded, and so that has been the. So what needs to be done in terms of all these environmental issues and water diversion projects and depletion of biodiversity and the communities under stress? One of that is mobilization of the Tibetans, which is the priority in terms of the environmental protests, environmental awareness, number one. Number two, resorting to the World Water Council, which has resolved some of the interstate water related problems, especially in the Middle East. We have also between California and Mexico in 1920s. And it was configured in terms of law regarding the use of lower riparian and upper riparian states. So these are some of the things which could result in some kind of a policy option. Now, I want to open up for discussion if the videos are played now or after the Q&A session. We have time for Q&A. Yes, please.
Thank you for the presentation. A very important presentation. I think all of us in this room have heard, but we don't know the details. And I must say that when I go outside of Parliament, it's almost nobody who knows about what goes on. And also members of Parliament who are not engaged in Tibet. They don't know about this either. May I ask, have there been any try to, for example, form an investigation group of international researchers or political figures who could make an investigation and present a report worldwide about the disaster, water disaster in Tibet? I ask this because Ukraine have formed a climate group who are looking on what impact Russia's war have on the climate and the environment in Ukraine. And this report is referred to in several various debates. also in international arenas. And I was just thinking about what Ukraine have done to put attention to the effect of the war on the environment. Could this be something for Tibet to try to get more energy worldwide from the international arena, both from political parties, from other countries, but also from the civil society's movement? Because I have never heard any international environment organization speak about what goes on the Tibet Plateau. I haven't. And I think this is strange because there is a lot of energy in all other cases. And this, what's happened here, is, as you rightly said, a disaster worldwide. It's not only Tibet, it's actually the whole world. And thank you for this presentation. Very, very important and very sad. Thank you.
The Tibet Policy Institute has been working on this issue, and they have published several research notes on the kind of dam being constructed on Yarlung Zampo and other rivers. There is also a lot of information regarding the protests that has happened in different places. So I wanted Tempa to reflect on this.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your question. Yes, Tibet Plateau, despite being so important, it hasn't received the required attention globally. But almost every day there is something about Tibet Plateau and its importance. You can read it. There are scientific papers, there are news articles, research papers. So its importance has to be generally accepted, but not at the highest level, because we are not an independent state. I guess that's the one reason. Now, to give you a few examples, IPCC brings out reports every year, and IPCC is the most important UN organ that produces paper on climate change. And they have included the importance of Tibetan glaciers. It has to be acknowledged. And they have also acknowledged the importance of Tibetan rivers in the report. And they have also acknowledged the importance of Tibetan permafrost, the grasslands. And then there's IUCN report, in which they have also included the importance of some of the nature national parks, or how it is being manipulated by Chinese government. And there are also other environment organizations that work for Tibet's environment. And we also have something called Environment Desk, which was set up in 1992 by His Holiness, or the Department of Information and International Relations, when His Holiness attended the Rio Earth Summit. So there have been many reports that we also produced, and there have been other reports. Yes, you are right that it is not getting the due attention, but it is definitely being recognized on a larger scale than what you have mentioned. Thank you very much.
I want to ask Professor Chellaney, what could the lower riparian states do in this crisis?
The lower riparian states can spotlight what China is doing. That's the least they can do, because the only recourse they have is to shine a spotlight on China's activities and stress, however politely they wish to stress, that there needs to be environmental accountability. After all, these are shared river systems. These are not China's own river systems. These are internationally shared river systems. These are rivers that are the lifeblood for nearly 1/3 of the global population. And all this needs to be done. First, we have to keep geopolitics out from any environmental discussion. So, with all due respect, if Ukraine has published a report, it will not get the same attention as a report done by some independent organization. I did my part some years ago. I published a book called Water, Asia's New Battleground. It was published from the US by Georgetown University Press, and it was a bestseller in the sense it was widely published in different languages across the world, including in some European languages. And after that, I published a second book on global water. But we have to continue to spotlight what's happening on the Tibetan Plateau. And it really means that European organizations, NGOs, also need to contribute their share. Asian NGOs definitely, American NGOs definitely. But I think it's time for Europe non-governmental organizations to start looking at an issue that also impacts Europe's own weather, climate, and overall environmental security. Why should Europe look just narrowly in terms of what's happening in the Ukraine war? Europe needs to look also at how its larger environmental interests are being affected by the rampant degradation on the roof of the world. This is an issue in which the entire world needs to contribute, governments for sure, but NGOs, and I think Europe today is an important funder of international NGOs. It can play a very vital role in spotlighting the environmental degradation in what is known as Asia's water tower.
Thank you, Brahma. The organizers are telling me that the time is up, but Member of Parliament Tapir Kao wanted to intervene.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, just thank you, sir. I want to have a kind of 1 second's interactions on this issue. I came from Arunachal Pradesh as a member of parliament, where the China is going to construct the largest dam on earth is just few kilometers from my parliamentary constituency. The issue is, sir, how do we tackle this issue? Naturally, we need to take up this in international forum also. But China is not the signatories of water treaty. That is the bottleneck where we are facing the issue. They have tested as a water bomb to us in 2000. They released huge volume of water within Arunachal. 11 bridges has been washed out. And it was sunny day. The flash flood came out from the Changpo River. It's Siang in my state, Arunachal, Brahmaputra in Assam. So they are not the signatories of UN Water Treaty. So how do we tackle this menace of China in all Southeast Asians? Thank you.
I want to club up this question with
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm from Estonian Parliament, and my initial question was very similar to that one to my Swedish colleague, but I'm changing a little bit. We are hearing a lot about the Antarctics and Antarctica and Greenland, but thank you for the presentations. I didn't know so much about the situation what you have actually in Tibet. It's definitely not a local issue, it's not a regional issue, it's a global issue. You mentioned that the issue has been addressed in a climate panel. I was wondering about the biodiversity panel because, you know, it's not only water, it's also biodiversity. It's also about livelihood of communities, and not only in Tibet, it's basically everywhere. And the second question I wanted to ask from you, my feeling is that what you are talking about is not just continuous change in the environment. It actually seems to be like environmental and climate threshold, which ends up in unpredictability of future. It's similar like the change of ocean currents or the change of Greenland, something like that, which means that we have to have much stronger attention to that on international level in all countries and in all continents, not only here. And finally, I have to say that in Estonia, one student wanted to make a study about the high mountains' importance for biodiversity and the climate. And at the local level, it was said, no, it's not important because it's so far away, which means that we have to have much more highlight in this kind of issues on international level, in media, in NGO level, in all possible level. Thank you.
If the presenters would like to reflect, just 1 minute each, please.
You know, to answer your question first, one problem that I've been seeing over the years is that the Tibet issue is highlighted in narrow fields. For example, the International Wetlands Convention, there's a discussion on the disappearance of wetlands in Tibet, or the IPCC will focus on the implications of Tibet's environmental degradation for global climate, and then there will be other conferences or studies that focus on just the water issue in terms of water flows of rivers, but not in terms of the impacts on environment and ecology. We need a more holistic approach to what's happening in Tibet, which combines the various elements, how Tibet is creating global biodiversity loss. After all, Tibet is rich not just in water and in minerals, it's also rich in terms of species, bird species, animal species, plant species, you name it. It is, in fact, it has the world's largest repertoire, it's the largest storehouse of plants used in traditional medicines in Asia. Chinese medicine, Indian medicine, Vietnamese medicine, all depend on Himalayan plants. So we need a more holistic approach to the threat from Chinese environmental practices in Tibet, and we need an approach that separates geopolitics from an objective assessment of what's happening on the roof of the world. Now, to answer your question, sir, he comes from a large Indian state that borders Tibet, which historically has had close ties with Tibet, but today China claims the whole of Indian state as part of Tibet. It calls it South Tibet. In other words, it is exposing the fact that its territorial claims are based on its annexation of Tibet. So this is a rolling annexation. You first occupy Tibet, then you want to occupy another state of India because you are occupying Tibet. So the thing is that he was mentioning about how in the main river system, known as the Brahmaputra most popularly, but it has different names, Yanang Sangpo in Tibet, for example. And he mentioned how some years ago, just a few years ago, China released, without any warning, large amounts of water. In fact, the water came down the river quite dirty, quite murky. What they were doing upstream, nobody knows even today as to how that river, which is known for its purity of water, this is the world's highest altitude river, how that river turned murky in terms of its water flow remains a mystery. The point is that we need to highlight what China is doing. Unfortunately, even the Indian government doesn't speak up.
Thank you. Tempa.
Yeah. Thank you much. Please, I'll take only 30 seconds. I know there's time's up. It's important to say something. Yes, as I said earlier, Tibet researchers, scholars, scientists paying a lot of attention to Tibet's environment, but it's the politicians that also needs to pay attention. So the best way to do is honorable members of parliamentarians go back and speak about Tibet's environment. Now that you have heard us, communicate that same to the parliament sessions, and also, if possible, organize parliamentary hearings on Tibet's environment importance and situation. That would help. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We need to wrap up the session, but please show your appreciation to the two speakers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
With this, we end the sixth session. So I would like to thank the Professor Srikanth Kondapalli and the speaker, Professor Brahma Chellaney, Tempa Gyaltsen. Thank you very much. Thank you. So now, next session is that we are behind the time by 30 minutes, so we have to be little moving forward. So next is we are going to have the division of working group and discussions. and we have 4 groups, Group A, Group B, Group C, and Group D. In Group A,